So, in the today's session, we are going to start learning about object-oriented programming. In this call as a OOP, object-oriented programming. Okay. So, what is the object-oriented programming? So, Java is called as an object-oriented programming language. Okay, so there are two types of programming languages. So one is structure oriented and the second one is object oriented programming languages. So Visual Basic, C and those languages comes under the structure programming languages, and especially for C++ and Java comes under the object oriented programming. So because everything is a class and object. So without a class, we cannot do anything in the Java. So everything is a class. So if we want to write a single line of code, we must create a class. So it's purely depending on class and object. So that's the reason it is called as object oriented programming language. And not only the class and object, there are other concepts which will also supported by this language like inheritance or interfaces, polymorphism, data abstraction. So there are multiple concepts which are comes under the object-oriented programming concepts. So the basic thing of object-oriented programming language feature is class and object. So these are the main basic entities of object-oriented programming languages. So today we'll completely focus on what is class and what is object. We'll discuss in detail. So far we are using class, right? If we want to create a program, we need to create a class first, and inside the class we have a main method. In the main method, uh, structure programming doesn't support any object oriented programming concepts, but there's very old structure or old concept we have. Like C language, we don't have any class and object concept. Okay, they are comes under the structure programming, very old languages like Basic, Fortran, COBOL, or C. So these are all comes under structured programming languages. We don't have any object-oriented concepts there. And this is the latest one. So object-oriented concepts are very important, and the latest languages like C Sharp, .NET, Java. So these are all comes under the object-oriented programming languages. Okay. So the main entities in the oriented programming is class and object. These are the two basic entities. So let us more discuss on class and object today. So what is class, what is object, and so on. Class and object and method. So these are the three things we are going to discuss today. So what is a class, object, and methods? So if I know, if I say here, what is a class? A class is a collection of methods and variables. Collection of methods and collection of variables and methods. Class is a collection of variables and methods. So in general, if I say a real-time example, for example here, what is a class and object? Let's understand this way. So for example, we have a animal. Okay. So under this class, there are no number of animals comes into picture. So for example, dogs or elephants, right? So or cats. These are all different kinds of animals. All these are comes under the single category, same category. Okay, that's called as an animal. So animal is a logical entity. So this is a class basically. This is called logical. We cannot see here. This is a logical entity. And whereas this dog, elephant, cats, these are all physical entities. These we can see here. Okay, these are all physical. Why we are categorized all of them in one category? Because they are having somehow a same kind of attributes and same kind of behavior. Same kind of attributes and same kind of behavior. So that is the reason we have put them in one category. Okay, so here if I say animal is a logical entity, and these are all comes under the physical entities. So the same thing we call as a class. So this category is called as a class in Java language. And whatever physical entities, right, these are all belongs to one class. Why we are belongs to one class? Because they're all having a similar kind of attributes and similar kind of behavior. So that is the reason we put under one category. So these are all called as objects. These are called as objects in Java. And class is a logical entity. Objects are physical entity. Okay. So we can create any number of objects for the same class. And as I said, all these objects are having same kind of attributes and behavior, right? So in Java, we call this category as a class, and this logical entity is a class, and the physical entities are called objects. And what this object contains, attributes and behavior. These attributes called as variables. We attributes called as variables, and this behavior is called as methods. Called as methods. So the same scenario in Java we call as a class, object. Object contains variables and methods. So normally the variables or methods belongs to class, but we can create any number of objects. So every object is having same kind of variables and methods. This is a simple example for class and object. So class is a logical entity. Why you are calling logical entity? Because we cannot, it cannot store anywhere until unless you create an object for the class. This cannot occupy any memory location, or it will not store anywhere. This is a simple logical entity. But once you have created objects, these will occupy the memory location, or some certain amount of memory is required for this object to store. So the objects are a physical entities. That's the reason we call them as a physical entity. So we can create any number of objects for the same class. Okay, class, objects, and variables and methods. Variables in the sense attributes of the every object, and methods. Now I'll show you one more example. So for example, if I say an organization, a company, there are more number of employees all working under a different departments. So every employee is having its own name, different ID, different designation, different salaries, right? So if you want to create a class and object for them, so I will have a class. Okay, this is my class. I call this as employee. My class name is employee. And for this employee, what are all variables and methods I can have? So let's say every employee is having some ID, every employee is having some name and designation and salary and department. So these are all called variables. And suppose every employee will get bonus, right? So I'll have one more method called as a bonus, increment or bonus. This is a method. So overall, this is called as a class. A class contains a variables and a method. Okay, this is called as a class. Now, if you want to use this class, we must create an object, because class itself is a logical entity. We cannot directly use it. So if you want to use this class, we can create any number of objects for this class. So for example, there is an employee called, his name is David. So for example, this is object 1. So here, this object ID is something called 101, and the name is something called David. So, and his designation is suppose an engineer, and his salary is something called as some number, and department number is suppose 10. So now this object is having the all the values, but class doesn't have any values, but object is having all the values. And whatever method we created, that method is also belongs to this particular object. So once you have created a class, we can create any number of objects for the same class, any number of objects. So this object is David, like suppose some John or Scott. So different names we have. Every employee is having different names, different ID, different designation, salaries, and bonus will be different. So all employees are belongs to one category because they are having similar kind of properties or attributes. The attributes in the sense variables. Every employee is having ID, name, but the values can be different. The ID can be different, name can be different, designation can be different, but the values are different. But the variables are different. The variables are same. ID is available for every employee, name is there, designation, sal, everything is there, but the values are different, right? So these are the objects and these are the class. And what the class contains? Variables. It's a collection of variables plus methods. So when I create an object, what happens is it will create its own memory, and it will acquire its own variables and methods. Suppose if I create one more object, it is also having the same variables and same method. And I'll create one more object is also having same variables and same methods. But these are objects nowhere related. So these objects are independent because these are all occupying a different memory locations. So object 1 is different, object 2 is different, object 3 is different, nowhere related. But all these objects are belongs to a same class. We have created all these objects based on the same class. Okay, so this is called as a class and object. And what class contains the number of variables and methods. And if I create an object, the object will acquire its own copy of variables and methods. Each individual object will acquire its own copy of variables and methods. Okay, now let's see how we can organize them through programmatically. Let's see. So first of all, let's go to our Eclipse. So I'll create a new package for today, day 5. Okay, so first I will create a new class. Okay, so I will just create an employee class. So let's see how to create. So new class. It's very simple. Please focus on this. Okay. So employee, I name it as an employee. I'll also take a main method. Finish. Okay, so let's keep this main method one side. Okay, I'm not touching this for now. So let's say employee is a class. Okay, or else let me just remove this. I will add this later. So this is an employee class definition. Public class, name of the class. So what I said, employee class is contains a number of variables and methods. So here I will create a few variables. So int, every employee is having employee ID. So I'll say EID, and every employee is having name. So I'll say string e name, employee name, some variable, and every employee is having salary. So I'll just say double sal, and I'll just say string department number, DPT number. So I have created employee ID, name, salary, department number. Department number is normally a number, let's say integer, and designation, let's say string designation, or we can say job. Okay, so these are the variables I have defined within the class. Now along with this, the class is also contains methods. So here I will create one more method. So I will just create one method called void display. So this is how we need to write a method. So we'll discuss more on methods in a few minutes. So for now, just understand, if you want to create a method, this is a syntax. So return type must be there. So if a method can return some value or may not return some value. If I call that method, it will return some value. If it is, suppose it will be like this. Let me just open one more. So the method is a piece of code in Java. Okay, if I create a method, let's say this is your method, Java method. So when I call this method, sometimes it may return some value. We are calling this method, and sometimes it will return some value. Sometimes it won't return anything. Sometimes it will print some value as an output. And if you want to get that output, you can also return some value. Okay, it's some kind of a sub program we can call as a piece of code. So whenever we require, we can just call this method. So whenever you create a method, we must specify the return type. If I return some integer, we need to specify int here. If it doesn't return anything, just say void here. Void is a return type. If method doesn't return anything, we must specify the void, but we should not leave like this. This is the wrong assumption. Okay. So we must specify some return type. Now I created one method called display within the class itself. So method body will start here, end here. Within the curly braces we need to write. So here I will just print the values of these variables. I want to print the values of these variables. So I will write some statement, system.out.println So I think someone is asked the question, can we store this value in some other variable? So basically system.out.println is an inbuilt method in Java. So this method doesn't return anything. Whatever we provided here, that will just print in my console window, but it doesn't return anything. So if return something, we can store that value in a variable, but it doesn't return anything, so that we cannot store anything. Okay, so it will just print the value in our console. So system.out.println, here I will just print these values. Let's say EID. First I will print EID, and then similarly I will also print other values, ename and salary. And these values, from where we'll get the values of these variables? Through object we will assign data. Salary and DPT number and then job. Okay, so I have a variables, a few number of variables, and also have created a method called display method within the class itself. So now we have created a class which contains a few variables and a method. Now this is a completely a class. So if we want to execute this class, we must have a main method, and within the main method we have to create an object for this class. Until unless we create an object for this class, there is no use of class. Okay, so there is no use of these variables and methods. Once we created an object, then we can just assign some values to these variables, and then we can call this method. Now let me just show you a small presentation here, then you guys can understand. So if you observe here, this is your employee class, okay, which contains a few variables. These are the variables, and I have created a display method here, and along with I will also create one more method called as a bonus later. And these are all methods. This is overall a class, and if you want to create an object for this class, we have to create like this: class name employee, object name emp1 equal to new employee. So emp1 is called as a object reference variable, and by using this object reference variable, we can assign the values to these variables like emp1.eid, emp1.ename, emp1.sal, emp1.job, and then we can call this method also through emp1.display. Similarly, I can create one more object like employee emp2 is equal to new employee, emp2.eid is this one, emp2.ename, emp2.salary, job, and display method I called. So like this, we can create any number of objects for the same class. Okay, but where we need to create these objects? Within the main method itself, because execution is always start from the main method. So display is a normal method which is belongs to the class, but the main is actual method where the execution will start. So now let us create a method called as a main. So main method syntax will be same: public static void main, and it will take string array is a argument as a parameter. Okay, now this is your string. So now if you want to use this class variables and methods, we must create an object here in the main method. So how to create an object? So if you want to create an object, we need to follow the syntax: class name and some variable name. So let's say emp1. This is an object reference variable equal to new employee. So as soon as I created object like this, it will create a separate memory location, and it will acquire its own copy of these variables and methods. Okay, it will acquire its own copy of variables and methods. Now you can see here, this is the class I created. Now I have created an object 1, emp1. This is a emp1. Now emp1 is having its own ID, name, designation, salary, and everything, right? Now I need to assign these values and to these variables. Now come here, just this is a creation of an object, creating object for the employee class. Now use this object emp1. When I say dot here, it will clearly show you what are variables are available for this object: dpt number, eid, name, and job, and salary. Along with this, we have also display method, right? So these are the variables and methods we already created in the class. Now This object is acquired its own copy of these variables and this method. So let's add the values to these variables. So let's say emp1 dot eid equal to, let's say, 101. Similarly, emp1 dot ename is equal to, I'll just say some David, because this is a name we have to keep in the double quotations. Now emp1 dot sal and is equal to, I'll just say some salary, and then emp1 dot dpt number. So here I'll say 10 is a department number, and emp1 dot job. So I'll say he is a manager. So now I have assigned all the values to these variables. Now once we assign this, and this emp1 is also having display method, because it's getting its own copy of variables and method also. So now I will call emp1 dot display. Now what is an output we will get here now? So I already assigned the values to these variables, and then I call this display method. So what the display method will do, it will just print the values of these variables. So I have created method like this, right? So it will print EID, ename, salary, department number, job. So I already assigned these values to those variables, and then I'm just printing those values by using display method. So this is all one object for the same class employee. Now let's run this code. Okay, now you will get the details of employee 1. And similarly, I will also create one more object. Let us say same class again, employee emp2. So another object equal to new employee. For the same class, we can create any number of objects, but object names, variable names should be different. emp1, emp2, these should be unique names we have to use. Okay, so this is another object. Now again I'll take the same thing and I'll change this value. So emp2 values can be different. So emp1, this is again John. The employee name is different. He's a John. I'll just say this is 55. Department number is 20. And here I'll just say, okay, so I'll just say CEO, and then I display the value, display all the values. Now when I run this code, it will give you values for both the objects. This is the first object values and these are the second object values. So we can create objects like this. Any number of objects we can create for the same class. But as soon as you created an object, assign the values and methods, it will create its own copy of these objects for the same class. And these objects are independent. There is nowhere related. Suppose if I change this value here, it will not affect here. If I change the name here, this will not affect here. Because these objects are independent and they will occupy their own separate memory in your location in your memory. So like this, if you understand this, it will be very clear. So what we understood so far is a class is a collection of variables and methods. A object is an instance of a class. So how to define an object now? How object is an instance of a class. That's the definition of the object. So an object is an instance of a class. So as soon as you created an object, it will contains its own, it acquires its own copy of variables and methods from the class. So we can create any number of objects. Now what is method? Method is nothing but a piece of code, a sub program. Okay, or you can say a block of code. A block of code which contains a logic. So method is a block of code which contains a logic. So where we need to create methods within the class itself, we create a methods. So along with the main method. So main is also a method. Okay, but display is also method. But main is actual method from where execution will start. So that's the reason we created all the objects within the main method. Okay, so when I run this code, it will give you data about 3 objects. So this is the first object and this is the second object. Okay, so this is the first example of how to create a class, how to define the class variables. These are called class variables. And this is a class method. And this is the actual main method. Okay. But sometimes, so guys, are you clear so far how to create this class and all? So Preeti is asking question why we took emp1.ename for second object as well, where the object name was emp2. Okay. Oh, sorry. I think I mistaken here. This is two actually, not one. Okay. So this is the values of emp1. This is the values of emp2. Sorry. Okay. This is my mistake. Run as Java application. So now we'll get these values. So when I use emp1 here, what happens is the old values are again replaced by the new values. That's the reason we got the correct output earlier. But this is the right way to do it. Okay, I forgot to change this one actually because I copy pasted here, right? So that's the reason I have just forgot to change this. So these are the values which are belongs to emp2, not emp1. Okay. So is it clear, Preeti? Okay, so just remember these are the values are belongs to emp2 and these are the values belongs to emp1. So this is a basic example of class and object. Now, but in while you are working in real time, what happens is, so multiple people are working on multiple functionalities, right? Multiple developers or testers are working on multiple things. So they will create their own classes. So the situation will be like this. So there are multiple people are working. So let's say he's a one guy. There are three people are working on three different functionalities. Is having its own functionality, and this one is own functionality is working on some other stuff. So first person is created a class, okay, for his functionality. And if second person is also automating something, but he has to also do the first one. So the first functionality, this one is depending on the first functionality, and the third one is depending on the second person functionality. So here the people who have created their own different classes. This is class 1, this is class 2 and class 3. Suppose the person number 2 required to, if he want to complete a functionality, he required the class 1. So what he will do is he will ask this class from the developer 1, and then developer will provide the class name C1 and he will use it. And suppose C3 developer 3 required class 2, so he will ask the class and he will provide the class. Okay, so this is how it will happen. But in this case, within the class itself, if I put main method, okay, we cannot share this class. We cannot reuse this class in others. So we cannot give this class to others because execution itself is start from this class itself. This is a main class for us. Whenever we provided main method within the class, that class becomes a main class. So we cannot share the class to others. So what we will do is normally, whenever we create a class, we will make this as a generic class. We make it as a we can share this class to others in future if it is required. But in that case, we don't put main method within the class. We will create one more class. Here we will add main method, and whatever objects we are going to create, everything will part of this class. And actual class is different. A main class is different. So in this case, I can just share this our class to others because this class doesn't have the main method. So what I'm saying here is sometimes main method can be there in the same class, or we can separately create another class where we can add main class, main method. Okay, that's the main context here. So I'll tell you two things here. Main method can be present in a same class. The second method is, or main method can be there or can be present in a same class. In separate class. So what is an advantage of this? If you go for first approach, main method can be present in the same class. So we cannot share this class to others. Okay, so this is an approach. The same approach we follow. This is a first approach. So actual class which contains variable, which contains a method, and also the main is also present here, right? So this class we cannot share with others because this is also having the main code. Main code we cannot share with anyone others. Only the class methods and variables we can share, but the main is very sensitive. We cannot share this code to others. But here, if you have this main method also part of this class, we cannot share this class in this particular approach. So this is a one of the approach. So the main method can be present in the same class. But if I want to share separate this main method in separate class, we can share this class. Let me just show you how we can do this. So main method can be present in separate class. Now what I will do is I will create another class. So in the same package, I will create another class, new class, and I'll name this as a employee main class. Okay. Now here take again main method. Now observe this carefully. So this is a class earlier we created, which contains actual method, display method, variables, and also main method. Now I have created separate class. So whatever, I'll also remove this main. So I have created a separate class, employee main. So whatever I created the main method, I will just remove from here. Okay. Now I'll paste it over here. I just separated. Now you can see here this employee is having variables and the main actual method which is belongs to class. This is the class method. So main method we don't have in this class. But where I have created this main method in another class. So employee main is a separate class. So here I created the main method and here I created an objects for the same employee class. I have referred this class here. If you observe this, I have created this object for the employee class only, but we should not create an object for this class. Okay, this is just a class I created, but this is a class I'm not using. So this is the actual class I want to use if you want to access these variables and methods. Now again observe this. So I have separated this main method in a different class. Now which class we need to execute now? So wherever the main method is present in that particular class, we have to execute. So now as soon as I removed main method, this class we cannot execute, but we can share this class and we can use this class in some other classes. And here I created another class, employee main. So in the main method, I created a multiple object for the same class. So this class I have referred in another class. Okay, this is my main class. So this I cannot share. I don't share this class. Employee main, I don't share because this is a main class for me. So if anybody asks you, I want to get some functionalities for employee class, then you can share this class. And they can still again use this class like this. And they don't access this code directly, okay? Because this code will be there in your system, right? So they cannot access this code. They can just refer this class name like this and they can create their own objects. Okay, so that's how it will happen. So for example here this is a employee class which you created. Okay, so you created employee class now and the same project. Okay, this is all one project only and multiple people are working. So you created your employee class, you will have your own main method, employee main method, your main class you have. So this is the actual class you created. So somebody asks you, just you can tell him to use this employee class and he can create his own objects like emp1, emp2 and so on, but he cannot touch your main code. Okay, so that's the reason we have to create main code in separate class. So this is also right method, but in the real time most of the times we follow this approach. So actual class code will be different and the implementation, whenever we create an object for this class, we will create a separate class and inside this we will create a main method and we create number of objects for the same class. Okay, now let's run this employee main. So classes sharing, in the sense we don't share explicitly on the same project. So this is itself is a sharing. For example, see, employee main is another class I created, right? So here I have referred this employee class name, right? Employee class name I have referred. This itself is a sharing because everything is present in the same project and the same packages, right? So that's the reason I can just use the employee class here. But these two classes nowhere related. If you observe here, employee is different class, employee main is different class. But how employee main we'll know about this employee class because this employee class is present in the same project which we have created. Even in the real time, so employees are working on the same project. They will also have create a similar project. So this project will be there. So I'll tell you how to share this project across multiple people. But here, sharing means we can use this employee class name here like this. Okay, on the same project. So multiple people will create multiple packages and multiple classes. Okay, so that's the reason we are able to access this employee class here. Otherwise, there is nowhere related these two, right? So employee is different, employee main is different. Both are different files. But how I am able to use here because both the classes are present in the same project on same package. Okay, it has to be in the same project and same. Okay, fine. So this is how we need to use. So employee main and employee. So I have separated this main method in separate class. Now let's run this class, main class. Now we'll get the same output again. Okay. So these are the two approaches we have. So main method can be there in the same class or main method can be present in separate class. Okay. Fine. So now I will little bit talk about class variables. Okay, so I hope you guys are clear so far how to create a class, how to create an object, how to access these class variables and all. Fine. So now what I will do is in this example, what I have done is for this class I created an objects and through reference variable, through object reference variable, I have assigned the values to these variables, class variables. So here and here, right? This is a one of the approach. And actually there are three approaches we have to assign the values to these variables. One is by using reference variable. So here this is an example for reference variable. So by using this reference variable like emp1.eid, ename, sal, these are all reference variables. I have assigned the values. And along with this, there are two more approaches we have through method and by constructor. By method, by constructor also we can assign the values to these variables. I'll tell you how. So assign we can assign values to variables in three ways. So one is by using reference variable. So that we have seen just now. So these are all reference variable. emp1, emp2 are all object reference variable. So by using this way object reference variable, we have called these variables and then I have assigned the values. So this is the one approach. This is the first approach by using reference variable. There is a second approach by using method also we can assign the values, and the third method is by constructor also we can assign the value. I'll tell you how we can do it. So by using constructor also we can assign the values. So let us see one by one how to do this. To do this, to demonstrate these three approaches, I will also create one more class. Okay, so let's close this. So I will create a student class. Let's create student. So in this class I don't put any main method. Okay, I'll just say student class. So normally what are the variables the student is having? SID like student ID, string sname, student name, SID and sname, and then I will just say grade. So I'll say one more character, a grade. I'll just taken three different variables, SID, sname and his grade. Now these are the three different variables of a student class, right? So along with this I will also create a method called void display method to display those values. Display, and here I will print all three values, system.out.println. Okay, so if you want to print these values, I can write three methods, three system.out.println methods, or if I want to print these values in the single line like as SID followed by sname followed by grade, all three values I want to print in the single line, I can write statement like this. First SID, okay, appended by, give some space, and again appended by yes name, again appended and give some space, again concatenation, and then print grade here. So if you want to print in the single line all three values, you need to concatenate them, and between them just give some spaces. Okay, so the space is also concatenated. So this is a single statement I created to print these values. This is our student class. Okay, now I'll create one more class which is main class. So here I am not writing the main method. Okay, I'm going to show you the second approach. Now I create one more class. I name it as a student main class. Okay, student main class. Now here I'll take main method. Okay, now we can observe this is actual student class. Now come to the student main class. So here I want to create an object for the student class. So in the main method. So how to create an object now? Student at the stu1. This is the object reference variable equal to new student. Okay, now I created a student1 object. Now by using this reference variable, I can assign the values to these variables. I can call this method. So I'll show you first approach again. By using reference variable, how to assign the values to these variables. Now stu1 dot, see now as soon as I put dot, it will give you the variables. SID is equal to, let's say 1010. Similarly, stu1 dot sname is equal to, I'll just say John. And stu1 equal to grade. This is a character variable, so we need to put in the single quotation. Let's say grade is equal to 8. So now I am able to access these variables through this object reference variable, and I have also assigned these values. After assigning these values, I can just call the method called display that will print the variable. So stu1 dot display. Now as once you have assigned these values, then call the display method. The method will display all the values of SID, SNAME and grade. Now let's run the student main class. Now we can see all the values have been printed. This is SID, name and grade. So this is the first approach. So what approach? This is the one. This is the first approach. So assign values by using reference variable. Okay, so using this reference variable object, we have assigned the values to those variables. This is the first approach. Now the second approach is by using method also we can assign the values. By using method also we can assign the values to the class variables. Now let's see the second approach. So what I can do is, so here I'll just commenting this one from here to here. Okay, just commented first approach. Now what I will do is I will assign the values to these variables by using a method. So what I should do is I will create one more method in the class here. In the student class itself, I will create one more method called void. So I'll just say method name is get values. Just give some name to this method. Okay, get values. So this get values will take some parameters from this class. Okay, here we need to pass a parameter. Values we need to pass. So here this method will receive those parameters. So let us say int, what's the first parameter? SID. So for this I'll just say ID. And second parameter is string. I'll just say string name. And the third parameter is grade. I'll just say character at G. So this method will take these three parameters from the main method. So from the main class. Later I will pass this parameter. So as soon as I pass parameter from here, this method will receive these values ID, name and G. This particular method will receive those values into these variables. These variables will hold those values. Now internally I will just assign ID into SID. So this ID will assign to this ID class variable. and these are all method variables, id, name and g. Okay, and similarly I will assign this name to sname. Sname is equal to name, and similarly grade equal to g. Grade is equal to g. Now you can observe here, this is another additional method I created to assign the values to these variables. So this method will take three parameters. One is id, name and g, that is grade, and we need to pass this parameter from the main method. Okay, so we have just created additional method in the class. Now come to the main class. So before calling to the display method, we already created an object variable, right? So now stu dot just call the get values method. Get values, see whichever method I created here, I'm just calling that method. Now here I will pass the values. So what is an id? I'll just pass 1010 as id, comma name, let's say John, comma, and grade, so I'll just say character, so I'll just say a is a grade. This is how we need to call the method. So from the main method I have just called stu1 dot get values, but get values method is accepting three parameters, so that I need to pass three parameters. So what is the difference between get values and display method? Get values is a method which will take the parameters or arguments from the main class, but display method doesn't take any parameters. So we can create different type of methods. Methods may return value, may not return value. Methods can take parameters, may not take parameter. That is up to our requirement. Okay, I'll discuss this in detail in few minutes. But now understand, I have created an additional method called as a get values, which will take three parameters as a value. So here we need to pass these values. So 1010 will be assigned to the id, John will assign to the name, A will assign to the G, and then again I am reassigning these variables to the class variables. So as soon as I executed this statement, the values will be assigned to these variables, because internally it will call this method, and immediately I can call display method. Okay, now let's run the class again. Run as Java application. Now we'll see, you'll get the same output. Okay, this is the second approach. We can initialize these variables by using method also. That's the second approach. So by using method also, we can initialize the values to the variables. Okay. Now let's see the third method. So guys, are you clear? The second approach, how we can assign the class variables by using a method. We need to just create an additional method in the class, main class, student class, and here just I calling the method by passing the values. That's it. Now this is a second approach. Second approach is assign values by using method. Okay, assign values by using method. Fine. So now, so I'll also comment this. Now I'll show you third approach. So by using constructor, we can assign the value. So what is this constructor? So we need to understand this constructor. So I will talk about this constructor in detail in the next session. But now here I'll just give you a few hints. What is constructor? Constructor is also a kind of a method. It is also similar to method. How we have created a method in the class, similar way we have to create a constructor also. But there are few differences. I'll write a few points about constructor here. Let's see. So what is constructor? Constructor, I will write a few points here, just a minute. The first point is constructor is a special type of method. I'll tell you why it is special type of method later. And constructor is used only for initializing the variables, not for writing the logic. But in the methods we can write whatever we want. But in the constructor we don't write any logic. We have to write only the initializing the values. So constructor used for initializing the class variables. one more important thing is should have constructor should have same name of class. Constructor name should be same as class name. That's the one difference between method and constructor. So the method name can be anything. Okay, method name can be anything. We can put any name. But whenever you create a constructor, the constructor name should be same as class name. Whatever class name we have, the same name we have to use a constructor. Next point. Constructor will not return any value. Constructor will not return any value, not even void. So in case of method, if method doesn't return any value, we say void is a return type. But constructor also doesn't return any value, but here we don't even specify the void. Okay, so these are all few differences. So method can have any name, but constructor name should same as a class name. And method can have we can write any logic in the method, but in constructor we don't write logic. We just use it for initializing the values. The third difference is method can return a value, but constructor doesn't return a value and not even a void. Okay, so these are the few differences. I will talk about this in detail in few minutes. And one more important thing is last point. We don't need to call constructor explicitly. So here when I create a method get values, I'm calling here. So stu dot get values. Then this method will be called and executed. But if I create a constructor, we don't need to call the constructor. So constructor automatically executes when I create an object. So when I create an object like this, automatically the constructor will be executed. So we don't need to call the constructor. That is another important point. Constructor will be invoked at the time of object creation. Constructor will be invoked at the time of object creation. So these are the 5 points you guys should remember. The first one is constructor is special type of method. Why we are saying constructor is special type of method? Because it seems very similar to method, but there are a lot of differences. It used for initializing the variables. The name should be same as a class name, and it will not return any value, and it will invoke automatically at the time of object creation. Because of these features, we are calling constructor is a special type of method. Okay, fine. So let's create a constructor now, and by using constructor we can assign the values. So that's the third approach. Now come to the again student class. In the student class itself, I will create one constructor here. How to create a constructor? First method. So first point is constructor name should be same as a class name. So I will create a constructor called as a student. Okay, this is a constructor. See, now it's almost similar to the method only, but the difference is we should not put any void, and it can take parameters also. So method is taking some parameters, right? So similarly constructor is also can take parameters. So here we have to initialize the value. So I'll just say same parameters again here, but here again I will just say same thing. Okay, also what is the difference between this one and this one? This is a constructor. This is a constructor. And this is a method. This is a method. So if you observe this constructor here, this constructor will accept some parameters: ID, name, and grade. And again internally, this ID, name, grade will be assigned to this SID, SName, and the grade. So this itself is a constructor. Okay, now we should not put any void here because this doesn't return any value. Fine. So now come to the main class here. So here what I will do is I have just commented get values, right? So now one more point I told you, right? Let's see what are all points we followed so far when I created a constructor. So constructor used for initializing the class variable. So we have initialized the class variable internally. Now constructor name should have same name of a class name. So the constructor name is also student, class name is also student. Fine. Now constructor will not return any value, not even void. So that's the reason we should not put any void here. And constructor will be invoked at the time of object creation. Now we can see this point. So here we have created an object. So as soon as I created object here, it is start giving an error. See now, new student. Why it is giving an error? Because whenever I creating object here, it is trying to invoke this student constructor. But here student constructor will take three parameters, but here we are not passing any parameters. So that's the reason it is giving an error. So we must pass parameter from here. So here I'll just say 1010 and John is a name of a student, and then I'll just pass a grade. Okay. So why you have specified parameters here? Because constructor will automatically invoke at the time of object creation. So here the first statement itself is an object creation, right? So here we need to pass a parameters to this constructor. So whenever I pass parameters here, the constructor will be invoked first, and then it will get these values. So 101 will be assigned to the ID, John will assign to the name, A will assign to the G, and then internally again reassign ID to SID, name will be assigned to the S name, G will be assigned to the grade. Now constructor invoked, and it is also assigned these values to these variables. And what next? We have just need to call the method, display method. That's it. So we don't need to use these variables. We don't need to use these methods. So still we can have these methods. Nothing wrong in this. Get value still we can have it until unless we call this method will not be executed. Okay. So now this is the third approach. So through constructor I have assigned the values to these variables. Okay. Now let's run the main class as a Java application. Now you can see it is also giving the same thing. So ID, name and grade. Okay, this is the third approach. Okay, so by using assign values by using constructor. Okay, so these are all three approaches we have. So if you want to assign class variables, the first approach is by using reference variable, by using a method, by using a constructor, we can assign the values. Okay, so guys, are you clear how to do these three approaches? Yes, fine. Now, so once we understood this, now let us see more about. So far we discussed more on classes and objects, and how many ways we can assign the values to these variables. So by using reference variable, by calling a method, by calling a constructor, by specifying a constructor, right? Now I will talk about more on these methods. Okay, what is this Java method? How many ways we can create a Java method? Okay, it's very simple. Now let's close this. Okay, so here I will share you something. Just a moment. Just a moment. One second, guys. Start. Okay, so I'm going to share you a small thing here. Let me just share it. How many ways we can create a Java methods? So if you observe this, so if I create a method is a piece of code or block of statements. Okay, so here methods can take parameter, may not take parameters and may not return a value. That is up to your requirement. Okay, so based on your requirement you can create your method. So methods cannot take sometimes it may not take parameters, may not return a value. This is one case. The other case is sometimes methods may not take any parameters but it may return some value, and the methods may take some parameters but doesn't return any value, and methods may take parameter and also it will return a value. So these combinations we can create a methods, Java methods within the class. Now let's see how we can create these methods in different ways based upon your requirement. Okay. Now let us see. So to do this, I will just create one more class. Okay. So I will name this as a calculation. Okay. I will name it as a calculation. Just take a main method, finish. So even methods and variable, everything I'll put in the same class. Now let us see. So what is the first category here? Method may not take parameters and may not return any value. Okay, so let me just write some notes here. Okay, so what is method? A block of code. So here I'll write all four cases to create a method. The first case is not taking parameters and also not return any value. So case 2 is not taking parameters but return a value. So case 3 is taking parameters but not returning any value. So case 4 is method is taking parameters and also returning a value. So same thing again I have written in the statement, same combination. Okay. Now let us implement this. So first method not taking parameters and not also return any value. It doesn't take parameters and doesn't return anything. So I will just create a method like that. So here I will just create a method called void. Void means it doesn't return anything. Before that I will create two variables. Integer, I'll say x, and I can also assign some values directly here. Okay, in the class level itself. Int y is equal to 0. These are called as a default values. Okay, through object we can assign the values, but if we don't assign the value, if you are not assigning the values through object, we can also directly assign this value. X is equal to 10, y is equal to 20. These are the initial values, default values. Now I will create a method called void sum. Okay, now if you observe this method, it's not returning any value, so that it is a void, and it is not taking any parameter, so that in the brackets it is empty. Now internally what I will do is I will write system.out.println x plus y. So it will print sum of these two numbers. When I call this method, it will print sum of these two numbers, x plus y. But if I want to call this method, how to call this? Through object only we can access either these variables or method. Through object only we can access. Where we need to create an object for now? We need to create an object for this class inside the main method. So I'll just say cal equal to new calculation. This is an object. Now by using cal dot, I will just call sum method because the values are already assigned here. I no need to reassign the values. So I just call the sum method and it will print the x plus y. Now run as, it will give the output is 30, 10 plus 20. Okay, so yes, objects always we need to create in the main method itself. Remember this. Okay, we cannot create objects outside of the main method because execution is always start from the main method. So at the time of execution of main method, objects will be created. Okay, remember this as a thumb rule. Okay, so objects should be created inside the main method always. Fine. So now I have just created a sum method. I have just called here. Okay, so now here this method doesn't return any value and not taking the parameters also, right? So this is the first case. This is the first case. And here we are calling the method. This is the case one. Fine. So this is the example for the case one. Now I will create one more method. So case 2. Method is not taking parameters but it is returning a value. Method is not taking parameters but it is returning some value. So what I can do is I will just copy the same method again, but I'll just commenting this. I'll comment this. Okay, now you just change this method. This is case 2. So what is the case 2? Method should not take any parameters but it returns some value. That's your case 2. See now, method not taking parameters so that it is empty but it should return some value. So how to return the value? Instead of printing this, I will use return statement here. Okay, return x plus y. So now when I call this method, it will not print any output here, but it is returning something. So what is the data type it is returning? The return type we must specify here. So x plus y will return integer type. So I'll say int here. I'll say int here. Okay. So this method is not taking any parameters, but it is returning some values here. Okay. But how to call this method here? Comment here. If you want to call this method, again object name call dot sum. Same way, but the difference between this one and this one is, in the previously this method is not returned any value. Here itself is a printed output. So we got an output. But this time it is returning some value, but it is not printing anything. It is just returning the value. So we must hold that value in some other variable. Here I need to create one more variable. So whatever this method is returned, that returned value we need to assign to the variable. So here we require additional variable. Okay. Now this res contains the result. So that we need to print. System dot out dot println. I'll just say res. So why do we require additional variable here? Because this method is returning some value. So the returned value we have to hold in a variable, and then we can print the value inside this variable. Now run this. You will get same thing. So this is a case 2. This is case 2. So we have created a method which will return a value but not taking any parameters. And if method is returning some value, we need to hold that value, returned value, in a variable, and then we can print that value of this variable. Okay. Next, so third case. So let's execute this once again. So we got this 30. So the third case, taking parameters but not returning the value. And Urushi is asking question, what if we give cal.sum in println? So yeah, that is also right. So instead of taking another variable, you can directly give this in println statement. So in this case, you can just avoid another variable. Okay, you can also do that. That is also right. But you guys will confuse at the beginning if I tell this. So that's the reason I have just skipped it. Okay. So you can also, if you want to avoid this temporary variable, just you can directly specify this inside the println. Okay. So now when I run this, it will also give the same. This is output is provided by this one, and the second output is provided by the second. So both are right. If you want to avoid this third variable, and then you can directly put that into println. This is also right. Fine. So the next approach is I will create a method which take the parameter but not return any value. A method takes the parameters but not return any value. Let's create that method. It show again. I'll comment this. Now I'll create again same method. It will take parameters but not return any value. That is our case. Third case is taking parameters but not returning any value. So what I will do here is, it is not returning any value. So let me copy this. Case 3. So taking parameters means here we need to pass two parameters. Let's say int a comma int y. So int b, some variable names. So this time sum will take two parameters, a comma b, but it is not returning any value. So void is a return type. So internally what I will do, if it doesn't return anything, we have to write a println statement. System dot out dot println. Here I will just add a plus b. Okay, now I'm not using x plus y. Okay, x and y I'm not using. I'm directly using a plus b. Okay, so this method is taking parameters, two parameters, and it is not returning any value. That is void. But how to call this method here? Okay, so I will just comment this part. So now I need to call this sum method. So I'll just say cal dot sum, and this time we need to pass two values. So I'll just say 100 and 200. Okay, two values are passing now. So 100 will be assigned to the A and 200 will be assigned to the B. Now internally it will add 100 plus 200. That will automatically print the output. So because we have written system.out.println, here we don't require additional variable because this is not returning any value. Okay, so this will call, this is a case 3. So not, it's taking parameters but it is not returning anything. Now run this code. So it gives you 300. Okay, this is the third case. So method is taking parameters but not returning anything. Now the fourth case. Method will take parameters and also returns the value. Method takes parameter and also returns the value. So that is the case 4. Now I'll create one more method. I'll comment this. So now both the things, like I'll copy the same stuff, and this is the fourth case. So method will take the parameters and also should return value. So return means I should specify the return type. So int sum, two values it is taking, and it should return some value. We should not print here. Okay, we should return the value. So use return a plus b. Return a plus b. Okay, now this method is taking parameter and also it is returning a value. Now when I call this method, how to call it now? Cal is my object name dot sum, and here we need to pass variables 100 and 200. So I have passed two values, but this time this will also return a output, right? So we can just use other variable, or we can directly put that into system.out.println, because we need to print that value here. Whatever written value, we need to capture it and print that value in my console. Let's run this. Right, so it is also giving the same thing, 300. Okay, so this is your case 4. So as per your requirement, you can create the methods in three different or four different cases. So methods may not take parameters and may not return any value, and methods may not take parameters, may return some value. Methods may take parameters but doesn't return any value. Methods will take parameters and also return a value. So if I create a method, that will be fall under one of these case. Okay, so that is all about Java methods. Okay, so now we have discussed about Java methods, and finally we will also discuss about the last concept of constructor. So we'll talk more about constructor. We already discussed a few things about constructor here, right? So constructor is a special kind of method. Constructor is used for initializing the class variables. Constructor name should be same as a class name. Constructor will not return any value. Constructor will be invoked at the time of object creation. So we have just used these points. We have already done this constructor. Now I'll tell you a few more things about constructor. So constructor means constructor also is a program, a block of code which will execute at the time of execution, at the time of object creation. So that's the reason I created this point. Constructor will be invoked at the time of object creation. Now there are two types of constructor. One is default constructor. The second one is parameterized constructor. Default constructor and parameterized constructor. So what is the default constructor? If constructor doesn't take any parameters, that is a default constructor. And if a constructor takes a parameter, that is called as a parameterized constructor. It's simple. So let's create one more class to demonstrate the constructors example. Okay, so I'll create a new class. Okay, so here I'll just say constructor. I'll just say constructor demo. Let's take a main method. So here I have a main method. So here I will create few constructors. So I set two different type of constructor. One is parameterized constructor. The other one is default constructor. So I will just create two variables. Let's integer x, integer y. So I will create a constructor. So what is the constructor here? Constructor should be same as a class name. So constructor demo. Okay, this is a constructor. So constructor should not return any value. It is used only for initializing the values x and y. So here I will say x is equal to 10 and y is equal to 20. So directly I can assign the values. Now this is called default constructor because it's not taking any parameters. Okay, this is default constructor. Okay, so how to invoke this constructor? In the main method, first we need to create an object for this class. Constructor demo cm is equal to again constructor demo new constructor demo. So this is how we need to create an object. Now you can see here. So this constructor will automatically invokes at the time of object creation. So we no need to call this constructor. So if you want to print this value, so again I will create just a method, one more method, because I want to print this value. So void. Okay, so I will just create a print. Okay, this is a method I'm just, or else I can just say display. So here system dot out dot println. Okay, so here I will just print x plus y because the constructor is only for assigning the values, not for writing the code. So constructor will assign values to x and y, 10 and 20, and then here I am adding x plus y. So here I created an object. So as soon as I created this object, here we are not passing any parameter. So default constructor by default will invoke. And then I will call display method. So cm dot display method. Then it will give you sum of these two numbers. Now let's run this. It will give you 30. So what I have done is this is a default constructor. So this will invokes default constructor. Okay, because here it is not taking parameters, so that here also we are not passing any parameters. Okay, this is called default constructor. If a constructor doesn't take any parameters, that is called as a default constructor. Now I will create one more constructor which will take parameters. Okay, now I can have any number of constructors with the same name. So here this time I will take parameters. Let's say int a comma int b. Okay, this is parameterized constructor. This is your parameterized constructor because this constructor is taking two parameters. So even though if you have created two constructors, both are different. Okay, one is not taking parameters, the other one is taking parameters. So everything is a unique. So a and b I will assign here, a and b, and these values I will pass through object. Okay, so this time what I will do is, if you want to call this default, still if I use this one, which constructor will be called, you guys can tell. So here I'm not passing any parameter, so default constructor will execute. Still it invokes the default constructor 30. Now if you want to invoke the second constructor, okay, then what should I do now? So instead of this, I need to pass parameters here. So I'll say here 100 and 200. Okay, so here I need to pass parameters. So 100 and 200. So this time it will invoke a parameterized constructor. So this will invokes parameterized constructor. Okay, now 100 will be assigned to the A, 200 will be assigned to the B, and again A and B will reassign to the X and Y. So initially we don't have any values, right? And Preeti is asking question, so we can invoke only one constructor at a time, right? Yes, you are right. So we can invoke only one constructor at a time because we have created only one object here. You can also invoke multiple constructors, but you have to create multiple objects. Okay, so for example, let's say here cm1. Okay, let's say this is cm1 and this is, I'll say, cm2. Now both are different objects. Now the first one invoke the default constructor, and here it will invoke the parameterized constructor. But when you want to call this cm1.display and cm2.display, you have to call like this. This is how we can do it. Okay, so the first statement will invoke the default constructor. Now I have printed the values with the same object, and the second constructor will invoke by second object cm2. Now I call the display method from cm2. Now we will get output from the both. Run as Java application. The first output is 30, second output is 300. But for the same object, we cannot use to call multiple constructors. At a time, based on the parameters, it will call only one constructor. Okay. So this is all about types of constructor: default constructor and parameterized constructor. So far we discussed about Java methods and Java constructors. So what are the differences between constructors and methods? So this is an interview question again. So what is method? What is constructor? What are the differences between constructor and method? So let us see what are the differences. Let me just summarize. So method name, here I have listed out few differences. So method name can be anything, but constructor name must be same as a class name. Okay, that's the one difference. So what are the other differences? Method can return a value, but constructor doesn't return a value. Okay, and method we need to call explicitly through object name dot method name, just like this. We have called here display method, right? So we have to call the methods by using object name, but constructor will automatically invoke at the time of object creation. Okay, these are the differences. And there is one more difference, like method can be used for writing logic, but constructor is used only for initializing the variables or a values. Okay, you need to observe this, very important. And one more thing I'm going to show you here. Okay, so I'll just cover in the next session. Fine. So here, these are all about differences between constructor and methods. So far what we have discussed about class and what is an object, how many ways we can create an object, and how many ways we can initialize the variables, and main is within the class, main is outside of the class. And also we have seen how many ways we can create a methods, all the cases. And then we have seen how to create a constructor, default constructor and parameterized constructors. Okay, so just practice these things for today, and tomorrow I'll continue the rest of the concept. So guys, are you clear so far? Whatever I told you in the class, if you have any questions, you can ask me now. Fine. So as part of assignment, what you guys can do is here I have given two assignments. Okay, so arrays assignments you can do it later. Okay, but just try to complete this today itself. Okay, because this is the continuation of the next class. Until unless you are not clear about today's concepts, you cannot understand tomorrow's class. So please practice this today itself. Okay, so what I'm saying, this is very simple to do it. So the first assignment is just create a student class which contains the variables and methods. So what are this is the class name, and these are the variables: sid, sname, subject1, subject2, subject3. So create a few variables, and along with these variables just create three different methods: get stu data, get stu marks, and total marks. Create three methods. So I have given some description about these methods. What this method will do is, get stu data will take the student details like SID and SNAME as parameters and assign them to the variables. What are those variables? SID and SNAME. That's the functionality of the first method. And the second method, get stu marks. So it takes the student marks as parameters and assign them to subject1, subject2, and subject. So this method will take parameters subject1, subject2, and subject3, and those parameters will be assigned to subject1, subject2, and subject3. And the third method is the total marks. So this method will calculate total marks, means subject1 plus subject2 plus subject3, and print the student details with the total marks, means it should also calculate the sum of subject1, subject2, and subject3, and also it should print all the values, means student id, name, and total marks. Everything will be printed. So by using this method. So this is the functionality of these three methods. So once we have created this class with variables and methods, then create an object in the main method. Like you can create multiple objects for the student class, like stu1, stu, something like that. Then call student class methods. Okay, so call this method. So this is the first assignment. It is very simple. I already told you off of the program. You can just enhance it. So the second one is, this is regarding constructor, I guess. So write a program to demonstrate a constructor. So what I am telling you, just create a calculation class with three integer variables. Let's say x, y, z, and then create a constructor within the class, and the constructor will assign the values to these three integer variables, and then create another method sum to calculate sum of these three numbers. So what I'm saying is create one class called calculation. Within the class itself, create one constructor. Constructor name will be same as a class name. This is our constructor, and I am asking to create one more method called as a sum method. So calculation is a constructor which will assign the values to these three integer variables, and sum is another method which will calculate sum of those integer variables, and then create an object for this class and then invoke this constructor and call this method. Okay, so this is another assignment you guys can do. So 1 and 2, just finish this today itself, and before coming to the next session, just complete this. Okay, so that's all for today. So rest of the things I'll discuss tomorrow session. So bye for today. If you don't have any questions.